Your mind is your greatest weapon, but right now it's turned against you. The same intrusive thoughts, the same doubts, the same endless cycle of overthinking. No matter how much you try to push them away, they keep coming back, louder, heavier, suffocating. It's like being locked in a mental war zone where the enemy is your own mind. You replay past mistakes, dissecting every detail. You question yourself. What if I fail? What if I embarrass myself? What if I never figure things out? You imagine worst-case scenarios, convincing yourself that everything will go wrong, and the more you fight it, the stronger it becomes. You wake up exhausted before the day even begins, drained before you've even moved. It feels like a battle you can't win. But here's something you need to understand. You are not your thoughts. Right now, your mind is feeding you negativity, fear, and doubt. But your thoughts are not reality. They are just mental noise, passing, fleeting, temporary. The problem isn't that you have these thoughts. The problem is that you give them power. You believe them. You let them define you. You let them dictate your actions. But what if you didn't have to? What if you could separate yourself from these thoughts instead of being controlled by them? That's where cognitive diffusion comes in, a skill used in acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, that teaches you how to break free from the grip of overthinking. It doesn't mean ignoring your thoughts or forcing them away. It means seeing them for what they really are, just thoughts, not truths. Instead of drowning in them, you learn to observe them. Instead of reacting, you learn to detach. In this video, I'll show you why your mind clings to negativity, how to stop overanalyzing everything, and how to finally take back control of your thoughts. If you're tired of being a prisoner in your own head, if you want to stop being at war with your own mind, keep watching, because the skill you're about to learn could set you free. Number 1, your mind is a terrible boss. Fire it. Imagine you hired someone to manage your life, someone to guide your decisions, tell you what's worth worrying about, and give you solid advice. But instead, this person constantly insults you, reminds you of your worst mistakes, exaggerates every possible failure, and predicts disaster at every turn. You'd fire them immediately, right? Well, guess what? That's exactly how your mind treats you, and yet you still listen to it. Your brain is like an over-caffeinated, sleep-deprived boss who never shuts up, never praises you, and never acknowledges your wins. It takes every doubt, every fear, and amplifies it. It finds the smallest embarrassment from 5 years ago and plays it on repeat at 3 a.m. It convinces you that the worst-case scenario is not just possible, but inevitable. And for some reason, you believe it. Let me tell you about a guy named Mark. Mark was a classic overthinker, smart, capable, but absolutely haunted by his own mind. He'd walk into a room and immediately think, did I say something stupid? Did they just glance at me weirdly? Am I being awkward? After every social event, he'd spend hours replaying conversations in his head, obsessing over tiny details no one else remembered. One day, Mark was supposed to present at a meeting. The night before, his brain turned into a full-blown disaster machine. What if I forget my points? What if they think I'm incompetent? What if I stutter? The next morning, he was so exhausted from stress that he actually messed up his presentation, not because he wasn't prepared, but because his mind had already convinced him he would fail. Sound familiar? Here's what Mark didn't realize. His thoughts were not reality. They were just mental noise. His mind had convinced him that disaster was inevitable, but none of it was real. It was just fear, dressed up as logic. This is exactly why you need to fire your mind as the CEO of your life. You wouldn't take advice from someone who has been wrong 99% of the time, so why do you trust every anxious thought that pops into your head? Just because your mind says something doesn't mean it's true. This is where cognitive diffusion comes in. It's the skill of seeing thoughts as just thoughts rather than as commands. Instead of saying, I'm going to fail, you say, my mind is telling me I'm going to fail. That small shift creates space between you and your thoughts. It's the difference between drowning in your fears and watching them from the shore. So the next time your brain starts catastrophizing, imagine it as a dramatic news anchor, making up stories for attention. Or better yet, imagine it as a terrible boss who has no idea what they're talking about. Fire them and take back control. Number 2, the lies your mind tells you and why no one actually cares. Your brain is a master manipulator. It takes a simple situation and spins it into a catastrophic, worst-case scenario. It tells you, everyone is watching, they're judging. One wrong move, one awkward sentence, and you'll be humiliated forever. But here's the reality. No one cares as much as you think they do. Let's take a real example. Social anxiety. Imagine a guy named Jake. Jake walks into a meeting, his hands sweating, his mind racing. He needs to introduce himself, but his brain is already feeding him intrusive thoughts. What if I stutter? What if they think I sound stupid? What if I say something dumb and they all remember it forever? His turn comes. He says his name, stumbles slightly over a word, gets through his introduction, and sits down. His mind immediately starts attacking him. You messed up. Everyone noticed. They're all thinking about it right now. But what's actually happening? The person next to him is checking their emails. The guy across the room is thinking about lunch. The manager is wondering how fast this meeting can end. No one remembers. No one even noticed. This is the core illusion of overthinking. You believe you are the main character in everyone else's story. But the truth? Everyone else is too busy thinking about themselves to care about you. Harsh? Maybe, but also liberating. Because once you realize that no one is obsessing over your mistakes the way you are, you stop being so afraid to make them. This is where cognitive diffusion becomes powerful. Instead of treating intrusive thoughts as reality, you label them for what they are, just thoughts. The next time you catch yourself thinking, they're judging me, reframe it. I'm having the thought that they're judging me. That simple shift reminds you that your brain is just making noise. It doesn't mean the noise is true. So the next time your mind tells you, everyone is laughing at you, challenge it. Are they? Or are they just living their own lives, too busy with their own thoughts to be thinking about you? Number 3, the science of why your brain lies to you. Your brain is an incredibly powerful tool, but sometimes it works against you. When you have a thought like, I'm a failure, or I'll never be good enough, your brain doesn't just treat it as a passing idea, it treats it as the truth. And that's where the real problem begins. The neuroscience of thought and identity. Your brain is designed to look for patterns and make predictions. It constantly takes past experiences, emotions, and thoughts and tries to connect the dots to create a sense of identity. This is where neuroplasticity comes in, the brain's ability to rewire itself based on repeated thoughts and behaviors. Here's how it works. 1. Every time you have a negative thought, I'm useless, I always fail, your brain fires neurons in a specific pattern. 2. The more you think that thought, the stronger the neural connection becomes, like carving a path in the forest. 3. Over time, this thought feels like a fact rather than just an idea because your brain has built a strong road for it. This is why if you keep telling yourself you're a failure, you will start behaving like one. Not because it's true, but because your brain has reinforced the belief so much that it feels true. The experiment that proves it. Scientists at the University of Toronto conducted a study where participants were asked to repeatedly tell themselves statements like, I am worthless or I am capable. MRI scans showed that the brain responded differently depending on what was repeated. Those who reinforced negative thoughts activated areas of the brain linked to stress and emotional pain, as if they were physically experiencing failure. Meanwhile, those who repeated positive statements activated the prefrontal cortex, associated with problem-solving and confidence. This means that your brain literally shapes your reality based on what you tell it. If you constantly identify with your intrusive thoughts, they will dictate your actions, emotions, and self-worth. The solution? Cognitive diffusion. The good news? You are not stuck with these neural pathways. You can rewire them. Instead of thinking, I am a failure, shift it to, I am having the thought that I am a failure. That small change creates distance between you and the thought, reminding your brain that this is just an idea, not a fact. Think of it like this. Your mind is a movie screen, and your thoughts are the scenes playing out. You can either be the character trapped in the drama, or you can step back and just watch the movie unfold. And once you do that, you take back control. Number 4, see your thoughts for what they are, not absolute truths. Your mind constantly generates thoughts, but that doesn't mean they are facts. Cognitive diffusion teaches you to step back and observe your thoughts like an outsider, rather than blindly accepting them as reality. Instead of letting them dictate your emotions and actions, you learn to see them, question them, and let them pass. Imagine your thoughts as clouds in the sky. Some are dark and heavy, others light and fleeting, but none of them stay forever. You don't have to chase them, analyze them, or fight them. You just watch them move. Instead of thinking, I'm not good enough, you tell yourself, I'm having the thought that I'm not good enough. That small shift reminds you that your mind is simply producing words. It doesn't mean those words are true. A famous experiment by Harvard psychologist Daniel Wegner, known as the white bear experiment, showed that when people tried to suppress a thought, it became even more persistent. This proves that fighting your thoughts only strengthens them. The key isn't to resist or control them, but to observe them without attachment. Next time your brain tells you something negative, don't panic. Don't engage. Just recognize it as another passing cloud in the storm of the mind and let it drift away. Number 5, the difference between letting go and suppressing thoughts. Most people make the mistake of thinking that overcoming negative thoughts means getting rid of them. They try to block them out, distract themselves, or force their mind to stay positive. But here's the truth. The more you fight a thought, the stronger it becomes. In the famous white bear experiment by psychologist Daniel Wegner, participants were told not to think about a white bear. The result? They thought about it even more. This proves that trying to suppress a thought only makes it more persistent. The same happens with intrusive thoughts. If you try to erase them, your mind clings to them even harder. Cognitive diffusion is not about suppressing thoughts. It's about seeing them for what they are. Instead of thinking, I need to stop this negative thought, try, I'm having the thought that I need to stop this negative thought. See the difference? The first one fights the thought, the second one observes it without resistance. Imagine your thoughts as clouds in the sky. Some are light and harmless, others are dark and heavy, but none of them stay forever. You don't need to chase them away. You just need to watch them drift. When you stop resisting, they lose their grip on you. And that's when you truly take back control. Number 6, cognitive diffusion, the simple skill that makes your mind work for you. Imagine this. You are sitting in a quiet room, trying to enjoy a moment of peace. Suddenly, a parrot appears on your shoulder and starts shouting negative things in your ear. You're not good enough. Everyone is judging you. You're going to fail. The more you try to silence it, the louder it gets. Now let me ask you, if this parrot was real, would you take its words seriously? Would you let it ruin your day? Or would you simply recognize it for what it is? A noisy bird, saying random things with no real control over your life? This is exactly what cognitive diffusion teaches you. It helps you realize that your thoughts are just thoughts, not absolute truths. They are like that annoying parrot, loud, persistent, and sometimes completely irrational. But the moment you recognize that you don't have to obey them, they start losing their power. A simple definition of cognitive diffusion. If I had to explain cognitive diffusion to a child, I would say, your brain is like a TV. Sometimes it plays scary or sad movies, but you don't have to sit there and watch them. You can change the channel, turn down the volume, or just remind yourself that it's only a movie, not real life. In other words, gobon hantuk, cognitive diffusion, lakach ban hakach hin swing hi, nun hang hin han train mon hin, chukong phai la chin ban. Ki ban lam juok jiunai, swing hi teo kuk se kong kon kiem soa juok kem shukve han, jonkwa ban nua. The science behind cognitive diffusion. This isn't just a nice idea, it's backed by science. In a study published in Behavior Research and Therapy, researchers found that people who practice cognitive diffusion experience lower anxiety and stress levels compared to those who tried to suppress or fight their thoughts. One experiment had participants repeat a distressing thought out loud for 30 seconds straight. Instead of feeling overwhelmed, most of them started to find the thought ridiculous, almost meaningless. This simple act of repeating and observing the thought rather than reacting to it, help them detach from it emotionally. Another study from Harvard University showed that people who see thoughts as just mental events rather than absolute truths are better at handling stress and making rational decisions. A story about the power of cognitive diffusion. Let's take Sarah, for example. Sarah has struggled with social anxiety for years. Every time she walks into a room, her brain starts screaming, "Everyone is looking at you. They think you're weird. You should just leave before you embarrass yourself." Before learning about cognitive diffusion, Sarah believed these thoughts. She thought they were the truth, so she acted accordingly, avoiding social situations, staying quiet, and missing out on opportunities. But one day she learned a simple technique. Instead of believing the thoughts, she would call them out like a commentator in a game show. "Ah, here comes the 'everyone is judging me' thought. Classic move. Oh wow, the 'I should just leave' thought is making an appearance again. Predictable." By labeling her thoughts in this way, she created distance between herself and them. They no longer felt like overwhelming truths, just background noise. Over time, she started stepping into social situations without fear, because she knew that thoughts were just passing ideas, not commands she had to follow. How to use this in your own life. Next time your mind throws a negative thought at you, don't fight it, observe it. Instead of thinking, "I'm going to fail," say, "Ah, my brain is playing the 'I'm going to fail' story again." Instead of thinking, "I'm not good enough," say, "There goes the not good enough." Thought, it always shows up at the worst times. The moment you detach from your thoughts, they lose their grip on you. And that is where true mental freedom begins. Number 7, social anxiety, the invisible cage. Social anxiety is not just shyness or nervousness. It's a mental cage that keeps people trapped in fear of being judged, criticized, or rejected. It convinces you that every social interaction is a test, and that failure will lead to humiliation. Your brain plays scenarios on repeat. What if I say something stupid? What if they secretly dislike me? What if I embarrass myself and they never forget it? These thoughts don't just exist in your mind. They shape your behavior. You avoid speaking up, turning down invitations, and shrinking yourself to avoid attention. The irony? The more you avoid, the stronger the fear becomes. In reality, most people are too focused on their own lives to analyze your every move. Studies have shown that we drastically overestimate how much people notice or care about our actions, a phenomenon known as the spotlight effect. But when you believe your thoughts without questioning them, you reinforce the anxiety. If your brain tells you, "They think I'm weird," and you act accordingly, by staying silent, avoiding eye contact, or leaving early, you actually strengthen the false belief. You don't give yourself the chance to prove that nothing bad would have happened. Cognitive diffusion helps break this cycle. Instead of reacting to every anxious thought as if it's fact, you step back and see it as just a thought. Instead of thinking, "I'm terrible at socializing," try, "I'm having the thought that I'm terrible at socializing." That small shift reminds you that your mind is generating stories, not truths. Next time your anxiety tells you, "Everyone is judging me," ask yourself, where's the proof? Chances are, there isn't any. Most people are not dissecting your every word. They're too busy worrying about themselves. The moment you stop treating your thoughts as reality, social anxiety loses its grip, and you start reclaiming your confidence. Number 8, change how you see anxiety, and it loses power. Anxiety thrives on illusion. It makes you believe that every social interaction is a test. Every mistake is disastrous, and every opinion about you is etched in stone. But what if you could see anxiety for what it really is? Just a passing thought, not a reality. That's exactly what cognitive diffusion helps you do. Instead of thinking, "Everyone is judging me," step back and recognize, "Ah, there's my anxiety talking again." Instead of reacting emotionally, you label the thought for what it is. Just another episode of the same mental story your brain has played 100 times before. It's like watching an old, predictable movie. When you see it for the 50th time, it no longer has the same emotional grip on you. Let's say you walk into a room and feel an instant wave of anxiety. What if I say something stupid? What if they think I'm awkward? Normally, you might panic, freeze up, or avoid speaking altogether. But if you apply cognitive diffusion, you pause and say to yourself, interesting, my brain is serving me the "I'll embarrass myself" thought again. Classic move. Suddenly, you're no longer inside the thought. You're watching it from the outside. And when you stop engaging with it, it starts to fade. Scientific research shows that labeling thoughts in this way reduces their emotional intensity. In a study on cognitive diffusion, participants who practiced this technique felt significantly less controlled by their anxious thoughts compared to those who tried to suppress or rationalize them. Because when you stop treating your thoughts as undeniable truths, you regain the power to act in spite of them. So next time your mind tells you, "Everyone will judge me," don't fight it. Don't argue with it. Just acknowledge it like an old familiar background noise. "Ah, my anxiety is back with another prediction." Then do what you were going to do anyway, because the thought was never in control. You were. Number 9, name your thoughts, because they are not you. Your brain is like a radio that never stops playing. Some days it's a peaceful station with good music. Other days it's pure static, loud, chaotic, and full of negativity. But here's the thing, just because the radio is playing doesn't mean you have to listen to every word. That's where naming your thoughts comes in, a powerful trick that makes your mind's noise feel a lot less personal. Instead of drowning in your thoughts, you step back and treat them like visitors rather than parts of yourself. Explaining it like you're 5, imagine your thoughts are like a bunch of chatty birds sitting outside your window. One says, "You're going to fail." Another chirps, "Everyone thinks you're weird." Another one screams, "Run! Avoid this at all costs." If you sit there believing everything they say, you'll panic. But what if instead you give each bird a silly name? The "you're going to fail" bird, that's Mr. Doom and Gloom. The "everyone is judging me" bird, let's call that the paranoid pigeon. The "why did I say that embarrassing thing 5 years ago" bird, that's Captain Cringe. Now, when one of these thoughts appears, instead of feeling overwhelmed, you just nod and say, "Ah, look, Captain Cringe is back at it again." Suddenly, it's not your thought. It's just a voice passing by. A story about naming thoughts. Meet Alex. Alex has a brain that loves to throw worst-case scenarios at him, like a game show host handing out prizes. Every time Alex tries something new, his mind screams, "You will fail!" At first, Alex took this seriously. He'd cancel plans, avoid challenges, and second-guess himself constantly. But then, he learned about naming his thoughts and decided to get creative. He called his anxiety-driven inner voice the drama queen. The next time he started overthinking a simple email, he paused and said, "Oh wow, the drama queen is really on fire today." And just like that, the thought lost its power. Instead of engaging with it, he observed it like an outsider watching a ridiculous reality show. Why this works, even for adults. Psychologists have found that labeling thoughts creates distance, making them feel less intense. A study in behavior research and therapy showed that people who labeled their anxious thoughts, instead of engaging with them, felt significantly less stress and were able to move on faster. So next time your mind throws a fit, don't fight it, name it. Say, "Ah, here comes the paranoid pigeon." Or, well, if it isn't the drama queen." Once you stop treating your thoughts like absolute truth and start seeing them as just mental noise, you take away their power. Because in the end, you are not your thoughts. You are the one listening to them, and you get to decide which ones matter. Number 10, change how you talk to yourself and take back control. The way you phrase your thoughts matters more than you think. Your brain listens to everything you say, and if you keep repeating, "I'm a failure," or "I'm not good enough," guess what? Your mind starts treating those words as facts instead of just fleeting thoughts. But here's the trick. You can rewire your brain just by changing how you speak to yourself. Instead of saying, "I'm worthless," say, "I'm having the thought that I'm worthless. I always mess things up." Say, "My mind is telling me I always mess things up. I'm terrible at socializing." Say, "Right now I'm having a thought that I struggle with socializing." That small shift makes a huge difference. Why? Because it creates distance between you and the thought. Instead of being consumed by it, you simply observe it. The thought is no longer an absolute truth. It's just something your brain happens to be saying in the moment. And thoughts, like clouds in the sky, come and go. How to apply this in real life. Step 1. Catch the thought. Anytime you have a negative belief about yourself, pause. Step 2. Label it correctly. Instead of saying I am, say I am having the thought that. Step 3. Move on. Treat it like background noise. No need to engage, analyze, or argue with it. This is backed by neuroscience. Studies show that when people reframe their thoughts in this way, their emotional response to negative thinking decreases. By acknowledging a thought without identifying with it, you regain control over how you react. Try it right now. Think of a self-doubt you often have and rephrase it as, I'm having the thought that. Notice how it suddenly feels lighter, less overwhelming. That's because you are not your thoughts. You are the one observing them. Number 11, change how you talk to yourself and change your mindset. The way you phrase your thoughts is more powerful than you think. When you say, I'm a failure, your brain takes it as a statement of fact, something absolute and unchangeable. But if you change it to, I'm having the thought that I'm a failure, suddenly it's just a thought. Something separate from you, something temporary. That small shift creates a mental distance between who you are and what your mind is saying at that moment. It's like the difference between being inside a storm and watching it from a distance. One feels overwhelming, the other feels manageable. Think of it like this. Imagine you're standing in the middle of a busy street and cars are racing towards you. That's what happens when you fully believe every thought your brain throws at you. But what if you stepped onto the sidewalk? Now you're just watching the cars pass. You don't have to jump in front of them. You don't have to stop them. You don't even have to interact with them. They just go by. That's the power of changing how you talk to yourself. Instead of standing in the middle of the chaos, you step back and observe. Let's take a real-life example. You walk into a meeting and you stumble over your words while introducing yourself. Immediately your brain screams, I'm so awkward. I just embarrassed myself. If you accept that thought as the truth, you'll spend the rest of the day feeling like a failure, replaying the moment over and over. But if you instead say, I'm having the thought that I embarrassed myself, it reminds you that this is just a mental reaction, not reality. No one else is thinking about it as much as you are. Your brain is just creating unnecessary noise, and you don't have to engage with it. Psychologists have tested this technique, called cognitive defusion, in real-life studies. One experiment had participants repeat a negative thought out loud for 30 seconds, like, I am not good enough. By the end, the phrase started to sound ridiculous, like just a collection of words, losing its emotional weight. This shows that thoughts are only powerful when we attach meaning to them. If you see them as just passing messages, they lose their grip. This technique is simple but effective. Next time you catch yourself thinking something negative, pause and rephrase it. I am having the thought that. This small change reminds you that thoughts are just thoughts, not commands, not prophecies, and not truths you have to obey. Over time, you'll realize that you are not your thoughts. You are simply the observer, and you get to decide which ones matter. Number 12, accept your thoughts and watch them lose power. There's a strange paradox about the mind. The more you try to push a thought away, the stronger it becomes. If you've ever told yourself, I need to stop thinking about this, you know what happens next. It sticks even harder. It's like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. The harder you push it down, the stronger it pops back up. But what if, instead of fighting the thought, you just let it float? What if you simply acknowledged it without reacting? That's the key to cognitive defusion, accepting your thoughts instead of battling them. Let's try a simple experiment. Right now, do not think of a pink elephant. Whatever you do, don't picture it. Guess what? You just thought about a pink elephant. This is how the brain works. It doesn't understand, don't. The moment you tell yourself, I shouldn't be thinking this, your brain locks onto the very thing you want to avoid. Now imagine someone struggling with anxiety. They have a thought like, I'm going to fail this presentation. They panic and tell themselves, no, stop thinking like that. I need to be confident. But the more they fight it, the worse it gets. Instead, what if they said, I noticed that my mind is bringing up a fear of failure. That's okay. I don't have to react to it. Suddenly, the thought becomes just a mental event. Not an order, not the truth, just something passing by. This approach is rooted in mindfulness, which teaches you to observe your thoughts like clouds in the sky. Instead of identifying with them, you simply watch them drift. Research has shown that people who practice this technique experience lower stress, reduced anxiety, and better emotional regulation. Why? Because when you stop fighting your mind, it stops fighting back. To practice this in real life, try this. Next time a negative thought appears, instead of saying, "Go away," try, "I see you," and that's fine. Then shift your focus back to the present moment, your breath, your surroundings, or whatever you're doing. Over time, you'll realize that thoughts don't need to be erased, controlled, or analyzed. They just need to be seen for what they are, passing mental noise that you are free to ignore. Final thoughts. You are not your thoughts. You are in control. Your mind will always generate thoughts. Some will be helpful, some will be destructive, and some will make no sense at all. But here's the truth. You don't have to believe everything your brain tells you. You don't have to be trapped in an endless cycle of overthinking, self-doubt, and intrusive thoughts. You don't have to fight your mind. You just have to change how you respond to it. Cognitive diffusion is not about getting rid of negative thoughts. It's about seeing them for what they are. Just thoughts, just passing words, just background noise. The moment you stop reacting, the moment you stop believing every thought as truth, you take back control. So the next time your mind tells you you're not good enough or you're going to fail, step back and recognize what's happening. That's not you. That's just a thought. And thoughts only have power if you let them. If you've ever struggled with overthinking, if you've ever felt like your mind was working against you, now is your chance to change that. Comment "Toi Kong, Faila Sui Ni Kwa Min" to commit to this practice and start breaking free from the cycle of negative thinking. And if you found this helpful, like, share, and subscribe, because more people need to hear this. More people need to know that they are stronger than their thoughts. More people need to be reminded that they are in control.